So take a moment to just totally relax your body. Sweep through, starting with your head, and relax. Then your neck, your shoulders, your arms are totally relaxed. The area of your chest, your belly, your behind, together with your back. And finally your legs. Think that any kind of blockage, exhaustion, anything that prevents your body from being pliant and calm, just leaves your body. So now with your body totally calm and relaxed, pay attention to your breath. Letting go of any disruptive thoughts and ideas. And then once again, think that you're on Valchas Mass Mountain. The air is fresh. A cool breeze is blowing. And you're in the presence of Buddha Shakyamuni. And just seeing his radiant body and his extremely kind face. pacifies all your worries, your fears, your doubts. Since he's totally concerned just with your well-being in that moment. At the same time as the well-being of all other sentient beings. And there's of course also the Sangha, who are great examples of kindness, compassion, and wisdom. And we are surrounded by all sentient beings. With especially those who we have a hard time with right in front of us. And then remembering that right now we have so many freedoms, so many opportunities. That others don't have. And so let's use this opportunity and generate a deep sense of care, closeness, and loving kindness in the form of what is called loving affection towards all sentient beings. Seeing all of them as potential friends. And there are flaws and limitations not in the nature of their mind. And then generate great compassion. This strong determined mind. Characterized by joy. May they all be free from these impermanent states of suffering that are not in the nature of their mind. And may I personally be able to help them to overcome all their sufferings, their dissatisfaction, and its causes. Try to really feel that sense of joy and strength. As in, the sky is the limit, and I can do it. And then think that that joy and inner strength and courage, it grows even stronger. Giving way to the altruistic attitude that is determined, no matter the hardships, which are impermanent, and no matter how long it takes, time being relative, to work towards helping sentient beings to overcome suffering and its causes. Guided by those who've done it. Like Buddha Shakyamuni. And those who are doing it right now. The Sangha. And since we can do so most effectively once we become enlightened, remove all the limitations and flaws that are not in the nature of our mind and that temporarily obstruct us. So let's think, may I become a Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings. And while holding on to the visualization, you're still in the Rajgriha Hills with the Buddha and the Sangha, surrounded by sentient beings. Let's recite the prayer together. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my accumulations of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my accumulations of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my accumulations of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay. One thing I thought about when I came up with the taxi today, as I was coming up, looking around at people, Indian families, Indian workers, and so forth. And I was thinking, living in India as an ordinary person, part of the masses, life is hard. Life is really not easy. Harder for some, easier for others. I was thinking, what's so strange for us, men getting married to someone they don't know before, right? And I thought, wow, I couldn't do that because I'm too spoiled, because I'm not used to hardships. The kind of patience you must have to make it work, to learn to love someone, instead of us falling in love with this person, having all these expectations, right? It's really difficult. Or live in a family, 2-3 rooms, and lots of people like, brothers and sisters. The degree of positive qualities, really, there's patience that people have. I'm not saying every Indian is patient, but, and I'm talking about Tibetans as well, the hardships they go through. I mean, the West, the neighbors over there, and because an apple drops on we go to court and sue them. Do these crazy things, So much misery and unhappiness because we can't get what we want. And patience, right? Patience, we think of patience as patience with another person's anger. But there are 3 types of anger, 3 types of patience. One is patience to bear suffering, to bear hardship. And that is so important. And my classmates used to always say, you people from the West, you can't bear any hardship. We, and my classmates, like I said, many of them came from the big monasteries at a time when they only got a meal a day. The monasteries couldn't afford more. And the hunger they experienced, right? They got these pieces of old timu, as they called them, like dumplings. So they were sometimes from the day before left over. They had little worms in the soup. But that was the source of protein, so they just ate them. And they said, despite the hardships, they were really joyful. There was a lot of joy. So I don't know, there was a lot of, because usually when there's hardship, it brings people together. There's much more of a community, and you experience this love. When everyone's got their own gadgets and money, and you're busy with stay away, I'm busy with my internet and my you know. So in the West, really, for us, it's unimaginable to live in this poverty. And the problem is we don't know whether our affluent lifestyle is going to last. For all we know, it could be over by tomorrow if whatever happens, you know, a natural catastrophe, or, I don't know, a nuclear bomb that just went the wrong way, or the right way it was intended. It could be over in a few seconds. And the problem with luxury and living this life that we live in the West is that we have got no resilience, right? So coming to India, I mean, the fact we have a culture shock is like, this is how most people in this world actually live. There's a few people who live in this artificial luxury that actually totally spoils us. Totally spoils us, right? So there are these incredible qualities when you see people just in the train. Oh my God, in the West, like, you're on my space. Here's like, you're on top of me. Okay, I hope you're comfortable, right? I mean, like the way they sit there next to each other, and no one complains. You're pushing against me. It's my armrest or something, right? Not at all. There's the other person, and there's a sense it's us. In the West, this kind of me. It's really very, very painful. So I don't know whether. Yeah, I mean, now I'm so attached to it. I couldn't be without it. But honestly, I admire this. I admire how people make it work, right? It all started with the thought having to marry someone, and you just follow your parents' instructions, and sometimes they know really well who's the right person, and sometimes they don't, or, you know, it just happens to be for other reasons that you can marry, and they make it work. I mean, it's so hard, right? And oftentimes they're really sweet, these couples. When I took the train to the south to continue to study, our classmates would always go to the south and take classes there. And I remember the ladies sat at the window and the husband would run outside. Would you like some of this? Some of this? Brought that. It's really sweet. Of course, that's not in all cases. Of course, they don't always get along, as people in the West don't always get along. But yeah, it's incredible to see that. And it brings out the best. That's why we're born, that's why being born human is perfect for Dharma practice, because you have a healthy mixture of well-being and suffering. Suffering is good. Suffering is good to overcome suffering. It can be good. It shouldn't overwhelm you. There's a certain amount that is healthy, right? So it seems totally, it's like you're talking to someone who's interested in hygiene and tells you a little bit of mud in your bathroom is good. Sounds a bit like that, right? A person who teaches you to have a sanitary home telling you, every now and then pick a little bit of, dirt from and eat it. It's good for you. Well, actually, it's true, isn't it? They say, little children, like, don't go over the top. There's something drops to the ground, let them put their mouth. They develop an immunity. In Buddhism, it's the same idea. Being born in the celestial realm, thank you very much. So in a way, in the West, we're not the best candidate. Like living in luxury, there are of course different people, but living we're not the best candidates for Dharma practice, because first of all, it requires some hardship, and we're not used to it. But secondly, suffering is actually, it can really help us. It can really help us. As I'm saying, it shouldn't be, balance is always important. If we're totally overwhelmed and we can't find a way out of it, but it makes us more compassionate. We understand from our own experience what other people go through. Very important. It makes us stronger. Oh, I was able to manage. I went through this time. Okay, I did it. While it's going on, of course, it doesn't feel that way. But when you're done, you're like, whoa, I did it. I survived. And I have more experience now to deal with it. Right? Makes me stronger. it helps me to see my own limits better, right? What I can do, what I cannot do. So it's always easily said. It's like when you're right in the midst of it, it's like, take me out of it. But after a while, because problems come and go, and you learn it's just part of life, and there's an acceptance, and you get a more realistic view of reality, right? More in tune with reality and more compassionate and so forth. It has its advantages. That's why as humans, not only as humans, but the best birth is as humans because of the amount of suffering we have, right? And some of the greatest masters went through incredible hardship. I mean, I don't know whether you've all heard of Milarepa, right? The great yogi. Unbelievable the hardship he went through. I'm talking not about the time when he was with his teacher who made him undergo a lot of hardship, right? But even before that, the terrible situation of, his family situation, terrible. The Buddha himself undergoing so much hardship, right? I mean, in this case purposely, but again, because it's beneficial. And also when you have a close Lama, he'll make sure you have your amount of hardship. Definitely. Right? Being a mirror to your own self-centeredness. Oh, how ugly. Right? He puts it right in your face. He makes your ego come, he or she makes your ego come up all the time. A real master realize, don't think it's just going to go, poor you. I'm going to do everything to make you feel good because you're special. You're better than everyone else. You're such a great practitioner. You're Rinpoche, actually. Don't tell anyone. Right? When we first come into the Dharma, how nice it would be to feel. Being a Rinpoche is so difficult, by the way. All these expectations that people have, all these responsibilities, all the stuff you have to do all the time that you don't like to do. So it's not a good thing. People may go, whoa, and then come all the time and ask you for this, that, and the other. So anyway, it's just not even such an advantage, actually. So, or at least it's for someone who is determined to work for the benefit of others and doesn't care what they're doing is really boring. Okay, all right, anyway. So I just wanted to say that, because also in the context of our discussion, of course it's not like I want others to suffer. It's not about that. And the whole purpose of having certain sufferings is to overcome the suffering, right? To make us more resilient and so forth, but eventually, of course, also for obstacles to be removed. As part of our studies, suddenly you got terribly sick and you had all these obstacles. I remember when we studied Parchin, one classmate, just the first day, a taxi drove over his foot. And his foot was broken, right? And our teachers were like, the Parchin obstacles. Oh, it's good, right? And we all had our obstacles. So it's like stuff comes up. It's actually seen as good. They compare it, like when you do this kind of study and contemplation and meditation, it's like washing clothes. Washing clothes. And suddenly the water gets dirty. Whoa! Right? But it's a good thing. Dirty means like stuff comes up that we may not like, may like, whoa. But it's the first step towards removing it. It's deep within our subconscious, sometimes deep within our mind, and it's deep within the fabric. Right? There's maroon especially, you never know, right? You don't know how dirty it gets, actually. Yeah, and oily stains, okay, you notice them. But you can wear them, the maroon may just turn a shade darker, but since that's a slow process, you don't notice, right? And then one day, you wash it. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of material, right? So it's not like you do that every second day, trust me. So, therefore, you wash it then, and it's like, whoa! Ooh, the water, that's not maroon that's in that water. That's brownish gray, right? So there was a lot of stuff in there. And that feels good. Oh, now it's gone. And then you rinse it a few times and it's gone. And you feel, so it's a bit like that. Our mind is like that. All this stuff comes up and it's like, whoa. But it's good. It's like that water that you're about to check out. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So just to put things a little bit into perspective, yes. I don't know whether that's anyway helpful in terms of the discussion we had yesterday, but just a slightly different perspective. Because sometimes I really wished I was as tough as my classmates. No water for 5 days, who cares? Walk up to the temple, take a bucket, and live with it. I had really good muscles at the time. I never had water. In our building, there was never any water. When there was water, the wife of the cook, she would lock herself in the bathroom and wash until the tank was empty. And we were like, Ajala, sorry, can you open the door? Almost done, almost done, almost done. Oh, done. Sorry, no water. And the toilet was right next to me. No water. Ooh. So then I had my little buckets. I ran to the temple, not especially at the time when people were, it's not really nice when people come so in the dark. Fill up my bucket, run back. Yeah, those were the days. So that was, yeah, go up, sure. The good thing was I came down with the full buckets. So going up with the empty ones coming down, so that helped. But anyway, but you get used to it. You get used to it. You get used to anything, really. So it was fine. It was fine. Anyway, okay. So, going back to this material, the Heart Sutra. All right. Okay. What part did we get to? We've finished now the part on that implicitly teaches the path of the path of seeing. Now we're at the path of meditation. Okay, just look for my own text. Okay. So what are the first words of the passage that indicates the path of meditation? What do you think? Exactly. Therefore, Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there's no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. Okay. We've heard those words before. At least no feeling, no discrimination, right? But that was taught in a slightly different context. Now, what the text is explicitly doing, it is going through all the different objects that lack inherent existence. First of all, from the point of view of recognizing samsara and who experiences samsara. Who experiences samsara? Recognizing samsara. What is samsara? Is it a place? Our mental afflictions, yes, that is part of samsara, absolutely. The mental afflictions, yes. Pardon?
The cyclical existence.
What is cyclical existence? What is it that isn't cyclical?
Everything that is not emptiness is samsara.
Everything that is not emptiness is samsara. What about the Buddha? Buddha Shakyamuni? Is he samsara? Because he's not emptiness.
Isn't he emptiness? I mean, that one who realized. So.
The Buddha is what?
Isn't he emptiness, the one who realized?
To realize emptiness, do you have to be emptiness? No, right? You can realize emptiness without being emptiness. In fact, if you are emptiness, you don't realize anything. Right? You're not a mind or a person, right? So when you're emptiness. Okay, but anyway, what is samsara? What do you think is samsara? We heard the mental afflictions. We heard cyclic existence. But what is it that is in that cyclic existence that goes through? The mind. Okay, the mind, very good. Do you do it, pardon?
Which give rise.
It gives rise. the mind gives rise, okay, but it's also, the mind is that which cycles, right? The mind, why do we say cyclic existence?
Because you are continuously going through rebirth until you...
Because you're going through a similar cycle, born, dying, born, dying, right? Like a cycle in that way. It's not always the same, but it's very similar from the point of view of being born somewhere. I like to do this meditation, you know, being born somewhere, learning to get up and walk and talk, going to school, high school, married, kids, pension, old, die, all over again. Right? All over again. Learn to talk, walk, eat, elementary school, high school, married, kids, old people's home, die, all over again. Just do it. I mean, life is hard enough as it gets, right? And then you have to do it all over again, right? You have to do it all over again. You work so hard to accomplish, you know, build this emporium maybe, you know, and then you're not a penny you can take with you, and you have to do it all over again. You lie helplessly in the crib and wait for someone to feed you, right? Learn to walk again, talk again, eat again. Oh my gosh. Isn't that wearisome? I mean, isn't that exhaustive to just think about it, right? Over and over. If we just had to do it once and we learned from what, I learned in my last life, I knew how to talk and walk and read and write. I don't have to learn that again. I learned something more. If we just didn't forget, right? And we'd be so much wiser. We learn from our mistakes from the past. Oh no, we make them over and over and over again. Right? If you really do that meditation, it's really powerful. I'm saying, not just in your mind, like it's fun, it's funny and so forth, but really, all this hardship we underwent. I mean, high school, come on. Puberty. Was that your favorite time? Yeah, some people don't have a problem with that. It was not my favorite time. And doing it over and over and over again, right? To really feel that. That's the difficulty. Meditation, I keep saying feeling, and I keep saying it's really difficult to define that feeling because it's different in every case. If it's a meditation on love, the feeling that it should conjure up is love. The feeling it should give rise to is love. If it's a meditation on what we just did, the feeling is, oh no! Really, like that's the goal. What is the goal of the meditation? There's always a sense that's the goal of the meditation. That's what I'm doing it. And that feeling should then arise. So going over this to have a sense, I don't want to do this again. I really am fed up. That's a good feeling in that moment, that feeling of being fed up. Right? Okay. Anyway, so cyclic existence, I just wanted to give you a taste of the meditation on cycling and cycling. But anyway, what is it that's cycling? The mind. And is the mind alone, or does it have something to do it together with? A vessel. Yes, body, exactly, the body. So it's mind and body. Another way of saying mind and body is the 5 aggregates, right? Okay, so the 5 aggregates over and over and over again. Okay. So, therefore, when it says explicitly, of course, it talks about the emptiness of those 5, but it also talks about those 5. Those are samsara. That is samsara, our mind and body. Our mind and body, of course, that's right now influenced by our root misperception, our root ignorance, and the resulting self-centeredness, right? So our mind and body are totally affected by those. That's why they're contaminated. If you remove those, your 5 aggregates are no longer called samsara. Okay. And that is which the 5 aggregates are that which experience samsara. They're that which experience suffering. Okay. So, therefore, Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there's no form, no feeling. However, these objects, although they're caught in samsara, although the five aggregates are that which is samsara, that is samsara itself, and it experiences suffering, the suffering nature of samsara, they lack inherent existence. So to look at it from the conventional perspective and from the ultimate perspective. Look at it from both sides. Okay. And then it goes on to say, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. Why is it saying that? Well, we've heard what samsara is. We've heard who it is, what it is that experiences suffering. Now, how do we experience suffering? Through what? What is the medium by way of which we experience suffering? Because here's us, and here is this world we experience. But there's no objective world. It's just a reflection of our own mind. Our world is a reflection of our own mind. That's another way of saying phenomena don't exist inherently. What we perceive as humans is similar. Similar. Quite different to what would a fly perceive when a fly came into this room? How would they perceive the world? Very different. I mean, we can only imagine, of course we don't know exactly, but just knowing about the sense faculties of a fly, just these eyes, that see from all directions, and the spectrum of colors being quite different. Animals, we know more about dogs and cats, what they perceive when it's dark and when it's light and so forth. So all this through modern science, we can get a sense, and their perception of this is very different. So are they wrong and we are right? No, subjective experience. It's in fact a result of our past actions, that we're born with these sense organs. That's part of being a human. We're born with certain sense organs which have a particular spectrum of perception. There's a spectrum of perception, but it doesn't go beyond that. It's quite limited. And we believe that's all there is. Right? We have a sense that everyone perceives that. But not only is it that, of course, on a common level, we share this common experience, but since our minds are individually quite different, so the one thing we share, this great similarity, is that we are all human. But actually we're individually quite different, so all our experiences are actually very unique. Everyone's experience is very unique. In this room, of course, we share a few hours, but then you go off in different directions. You have different rooms. You experience the day differently. Similar, but differently. There's similarity, but it still differs. So, and that is your reality. That is a reflection of your mind. That's why in Buddhism we try to change the mind, not the external. Because the external, if you change the external, well, first of all, that's impossible to change it. And secondly, you don't change your perception of the external. Right? You don't change your perception. So changing your perception is changing the world, your world. Therefore, the Buddha can be among us and perceive things as blissful, as pure, as just, well, temporarily flawed, etc. Right? Buddha knows we're suffering, that this is for us, it's a reality. Yeah? It's a reality for us. We don't know that it lacks inherent existence, therefore we experience it very vividly. The Buddha is aware of that. But from the side of his own mind, no. It's pure. Right? That's why there is a distinction. It depends on the author. I've discussed it before. The Buddha perceiving phenomena, they're different, like I said, different masters having different explanations, and they all make sense. But there is also that explanation when it said that from the point of view of the body and mind, the marks and signs of a Buddha, those are not perceived through us, because they're pure. It's this pure, there's these pure aspects, and so therefore they're perceived from the Buddha himself because of that purity, because of a lack of any kind of obscurations. Plus emptiness, of course, as well, because that's the ultimate nature. So the other explanation, I didn't want to confuse you too much. On one day I told you, no, It's all conventional truth. There's one way of thinking of it, since everything is labeled. But another way of thinking about it is that anything that comes from the Buddha is totally pure, because it arises from a state that is free from any obscurations. But then everything else that is our reality, which always appears to exist inherently, so the Buddha is aware of that. It's not like to the Buddha inherent existence appears, but the appearance of inherent existence. That exists, right? What appears to you, to us, the Buddha knows that. So the conventional truth, our conventional truth that always appears to exist inherently, that appears to the Buddha. Not inherent existence, but the appearance of inherent existence. So the Buddha knows exactly what we are experiencing through us, but from his own side, he only has the experience of his own pure qualities, since those are the qualities he achieved. So therefore, the Buddha lives among us, but has a different view of reality. And that's, of course, that totally makes sense. Just as an ordinary person, we have pessimists and we have optimists, right? People who see things always in a more positive way. They may eat the same kind of food, right? But it tastes different to them. They enjoy it. It's just their mental state is more positive, whereas the other person is more negative, more pessimistic about it. And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it. If all it requires to change our mind, that's the only thing we can change. It's all coming from our mental consciousness. It's all coming from the mental consciousness. And the first step is to know it, and the second step is to subdue it, to learn to control it. Now, we think, how controlling, right? We have this sense of freedom. Give your mind some freedom. But the freedom our mind wants is to just get angry and just enjoy. And we're just so used to it. So right now, the freedom for our mind is a negative kind of freedom, a harmful freedom. So to subdue it means to control the afflictive emotions and give way to positive ones. And that makes us that much happier. The more love and compassion we have in our heart, the other person may not know about it, and therefore it doesn't benefit them. But it definitely benefits us, as I keep saying, right? So, going back to this, therefore, how do we experience suffering? Through which medium? That is explained in those words, no I, no ear, no nose. So, no, of course, here it's saying inherently there isn't, but it's also indicating that there are eyes, ears, noses, tongues, body, and of course there's the mind. So in other words, they're what are called the sense faculties. Sense faculties. Okay, now here we can just rely on the explanation that science gives us, modern science. In order to see something, you need the eye, you need the retina of the eye, you need the parts of the brain, the visual center of your brain, the visual cortex and so forth. So you need all these different parts of the brain, because just having functioning eyes doesn't mean you can see. Some people have brain damage and therefore turn blind. I mean, they are hit over the head in the wrong place and they turn blind, although the eyes are fully functioning. So in Buddhism, you find that explanation of sense faculties, which doesn't refer to the eye organ itself, but something subtler, they say, some subtle form. It's a little hard to really understand what they mean, but with modern science, it would make sense. It's not just the organ, but it's also kind of the retina, for instance, a certain part of that, parts of the brain, etc. And just the potential as well, like a potential to be able to perceive certain objects. Anyway, the sense faculty, the way it's described in the scriptures, it's a little difficult to understand, but the point is we can all agree we need some physical basis in order to see. Okay, so those are the eye sense power, as it's sometimes called, or eye sense faculty, and sometimes in short just eye. Eye sense faculty, they're used interchangeably. In fact, they say eye doesn't mean eye organ, the way we look at it, like the eyeball, for instance. No, it refers to everything that is needed to perceive a visual form. Therefore, eye sense faculty and eye are the same. So, on a conventional level, there's an eye, an ear, a nose, a tongue, and a body that help us to experience visual form, sounds, odor, tastes, and objects of touch with respect to the sense objects. But then there's also the mind as also a sense, the mental consciousness. So there, the mental consciousness doesn't require a sense faculty, as in a physical sense faculty. It doesn't require that. So whatever the sense consciousnesses perceive, based on what they perceive, then the mental consciousness can perceive the same thing. So it's the mental consciousness depends on the sense consciousness, and the sense consciousness depends on the sense faculty. Not just on the sense faculty, also on other things. But here in relation to the explanation given here, what the sense consciousness depends on, what is mentioned here is the sense faculty. Of course, it also depends on an object, and it depends on an immediately preceding moment of perception. Okay? Why an immediately preceding moment of perception? Because for a present moment of perception to take place, to have that quality of being clear and knowing, you must have had a previous moment of being clear and knowing. To have a physical object, you need to have a physical object a moment before for a present physical object to arise. So similarly, for the sense consciousnesses, for them to arise, there must have been a previous moment of awareness, right? So for the sense consciousness to arise in the entity of a conscious and aware entity, it must have been preceded by a former moment of a conscious and aware entity. And in the case of the eye consciousness, that previous moment that gives rise to it, which is called the immediately perceiving condition, it doesn't have to be a sense consciousness. It can't be a sense consciousness, because when we're asleep, there are no sense consciousnesses. So the first moment after we have awakened, that first moment of perception, seeing the sun, for instance, since that must have been preceded by a moment of perception, by a moment of consciousness, that can only be the mental consciousness, which of course is active while we're asleep. There's never a time when there is no consciousness. Even when we're dying, we're conscious. There is consciousness. There is consciousness. However, the level of attention is not strong enough. We're not trained to be very attentive to the objects that appear. So that we train that. Or when we're dreaming. Right? Right now, a dream just happens. There's no control. Lucid dreaming, you've heard of lucid dreaming, when there is control, when you can actually control your dreams. This is where a mental consciousness that is ordinarily, due to its subtlety, we're unable to actually take control. It's just happening to us. It's just happening to us. It's not like we can think, oh, now I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm just dreaming. So, right? And kind of take control as we can do while we're awake relatively easily. Oh, my mind is thinking this. No, I want to think this now. Now I want to do, right? And I have clear memory of this thought process. Well, we can learn to develop that while we're sleeping and even while dying. Because awareness is there anyway. But right now it's just happening to us as if our mind can't react to it basically. It just experiences. But besides the fact that, okay, we can learn this, we can take more control and so forth, in that way we can learn to control our rebirth, right? Because that state between death, being alive and a new life and a rebirth, that is the time of dying. That is the period in between. So if you can control that, you can basically control where you're going to be reborn. And that there are people who can do it, no doubt. No doubt. Right? The Dalai Lamas, the Karmapas. I mean, they leave letters behind. right? Saying, I'm going to be reborn in this family. The mother's name is such and such, that I'll be born on that day. How can you previously say that? Like the Karmapas are well known for that, hiding messages somewhere, and then when the time has come to look for them, you'll be born there, you'll be, to this family, father's name is this, mother's name is this, be born at this time. And in that way they found the last Karmapa, because they found this message. He had given it to someone in the form of an amulet. You have these pieces of papers, usually they contain a mandala, like a sacred object. They're folded in a certain way, certain strings are wrapped around it, and you stitch it into a piece of cloth to keep it protected, right? They're said to be like protective amulets that children often wear. And the previous Karmapa, previous to the present Karmapa, he had given one to Taisito Rinpoche. And they were totally at loss. Where are we going to find the present Karmapa? Where could he have left this message? And one day he remembered, oh, he gave me that amulet. Maybe it wasn't a drawing of a mandala or, some sacred writing. Maybe he opened it and there it was. Look in this, in the form of a poem, like look at this place, this and this, there's this nomad family, there's blah, blah, blah. And they went to look, then there was a boy who was born at that time and so forth. So that's how they found the Karmapa. So try to do that yourself. Well, if you look for me, look at Washington, D.C., there's this, whatever, right? Okay, so they're said to be control. We can all learn it, but we haven't done so yet. We don't even think about our death. Forget about preparing. Oh, I don't want to think of death and dying. Oh, that's so scary, right? So we're totally caught. Like, oh no, this is too early. But once it started, that's it. So the first step, of course, is to accept our own death. Prepare for our own death. That's why we do these meditations. But that's just the first step. And then visualize your dying. Go through these stages. Okay? Be ready for when it happens, you're fully lucidly there. Right? Utilize the clear light mind of death. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. When you study about this, death is such a beautiful, beautiful time, such a special time. So special, because this incredible mind arises. When people have near-death experience and they talk about the tunnel, right? That's totally part of the description that the Buddha also gives, like where there's just darkness, sudden darkness, and then this light arises, clear light mind. I remember there was a whole documentary on the human life, started with birth and everything, and it ended with death. And they accompanied a man who had cancer, right? He was like, okay, I'm dying, so you can just, keep your camera running and to the moment I die. So all the time the camera was there. He was totally fine with it. He was German, but he lived in England, maybe in Ireland, I'm not sure. Anyway, so they accompanied him, and but in that context, in that last, and I found that last one most fascinating. The first and the last were most fascinating. And then in that last documentary, they also interviewed people who had near-death experiences, who said that there was this light and this wisdom and compassion. Yeah, right. Big deal. The Buddha talked about it 2,600 years ago. Yeah, it's in the nature of, this is the actual nature of our mind. There's wisdom and unconditional love. That is the nature of our mind. And that arises at that time. And it's so beautiful. It's such a wonderful, peaceful state. That is the state we should experience. Not that crappy happiness of samsara, right? That's nothing. It's garbage in comparison to that blissful state you find yourself in that clear light mind. And that is the mind that's going to be enlightened, that gets enlightened. But we can only manifest it or make it manifest for long periods if we remove the obstructions that basically keep it from manifesting, except for a few times, special times at the time of death, right? Just before the mind leaves the body. And then our karmic forces, they take over and we're born anywhere and it becomes coarser again. So that's actually, to understand that, it's really positive. It's not about getting rid of ourselves, or having to give up our I, or forcing ourselves to give up all the pleasures. No, no, no. It's not about that. Buddhism is not about that. It's about, I don't need this stuff. This stuff that I'm been so attached to. Renunciation. We talk about renunciation. It's not about chucking everything out because you have to. It's like, I don't need it. I don't need it. Renunciation is often misunderstood. People feel, oh, to be oh no, that's like I have to give up everything and I have to live without good food and no, it's because when you don't care about it, when you joyfully give it up, when you feel, oh, I don't need it. Gosh, it's a burden. Look in the West, the burden of possession. I was thinking, oh my God, my sister and my mom, now they live together in 2 buildings next to each other. And my sister built this huge house. And she doesn't have the time. Like the moment she's cleaned everything, she has to start over again and protect things. And she's always busy. She never has the time. Her garage is so full with stuff that she wants to sell. She doesn't want to throw away, but then she doesn't have the time to sell it. And so then she sits down to sell it, but then there's so much time gone. And then in the meantime, she bought something new, so it replaces the stuff in the garage. And it's like, wow, burden, 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 burden. The burden of possession, right? Always worried, oh, someone may steal it. We can't go too far away. Did you leave the door open? This constant worry and concern. No time to do anything else but look after your possession, right? So we're like, oh, poor people who don't have anything. But sometimes, like these poor monks sometimes, but they're so happy to have a little, right? They're happy because they want to do something else. Yeah? They want to do something else. Of course, if you want it so badly, then it's a suffering. But if you feel like, oh, I can do something else, I've got some time to do other things, such a relief, right? Such a burden. So when we get to that point, renunciation is a total freedom, a sense of freedom. Yeah? People like when they hear, when you cut off your hair, oh my God, right? When they once asked me, they didn't dare to ask me the longest time, my family, right? They thought like, oh my God, someone basically forced me to shave my head. That was their version. Like after the Second World War, the defectors and the ones who, went with the enemy, like befriended the enemy, they were shaved in front, like embarrassed. So this is what being shaved basically means in the area where we come from. Or you're a skinhead, a neo-Nazi. A neo-Nazi or someone who befriended the enemy, basically, right? Or you're a survivor of chemotherapy. So, but that's usually the perception of people. So, and I shaved my head. They were like totally, oh my God, And when I told them, it was such a sense of freedom. Huh? They're like, can you say that again? Right? Like, a freedom? Yeah, I said, look. I said it jokingly, no bad hair days. No bad hair days. I mean, the amount of shampoo you need, right? It's cold, it's wet. Dry, right? It's cold outside, it's wet outside, whatever. 2 minutes, right? A bit of soap, feels clean again. Oh, it's the easiest thing. I love it. Oh my God, I'm so glad I don't have hair. Yeah? I like my hair, but when the thought came, I shave it off. I was like, whoa. And as it was lying there, it really felt like a freedom. So it wasn't anything, it was not, it was a freedom, a sense of freedom. So when we talk about liberation, freedom, liberation is just another word for freedom. So you let go because you think there's something greater. That's why. That's all it is. It's a total volunteer kind of step. It's not like, oh, I've got too much stuff, chuck it all, I'll put it in a box, put the box outside, and the next day take it all back in. It's not like that, right? We've done that as well, of course. I've got too much, and then I'm like, no, I can't let go of that. I may need it in 3 years' time for 5 minutes, so I better leave it in the room, right? That's important to understand. So it's all about letting go because you like to. Because you can breathe. That's why we always talk about the chains of samsara. They're like chains, they keep us chained. All right. Anyway, going back to these objects, the objects that the mind perceives. How does it perceive the objects, the sense objects? In other words, what we call the world around us. How does it do so? Well, in dependence on the faculty, the sense faculty. A former moment of awareness, I already mentioned that, but that's mentioned, well, not in this context so much, but it's implied. Or it's also indicated, you just know indirectly through that. But the point is that, yes, so you have the sense faculties, you have the mind itself, the mental consciousness, that only depends on a former moment of consciousness, which includes the sense consciousnesses. You get, the mental consciousness gets all its information from a former moment of mental consciousness or any of the sense consciousnesses. So, and then based on that, you perceive the sense objects and all other phenomena. The mental consciousness can take to mind anything, no limitations. Remember, I talked about even the mind of a Buddha can be known. Conceptually, you can take it to mind, right? Conceptually, you can know the mind of a Buddha. You can know the impermanence of the mind of a Buddha. So then you better know the mind of a Buddha to know its impermanence, for instance, right? So you can know all that. How much you know of it, that leads to a totally different debate. To know something, do you need to know everything about it? That'd be ludicrous. I know James' body, but only a very little part of it. And still I can say I know James, right? I don't know everything about him. I don't need to know everything about him. So to know something, certain characteristics are sufficient to know that's him and not Mike. Right? I can discern the two. Does that make sense? And of course, I'm no Mike for that as well. All right. Clarification or?
About the mental consciousness.
Okay.
So what came up was if there's say a brain injury, I'm thinking of a specific case where there's an injury to the brain and she lost the ability to actually fear. So is that an injury to the mental consciousness?
That's very interesting what you're bringing up.
She would undergo some similar situations, like very traumatic. What we would experience as traumatic was just no fear whatsoever.
Right. Okay. Oh, right. So you're actually addressing something that goes into the area of brain versus mind.
Yeah.
How strongly are they dependent on each other? Is it mind over brain or brain over mind? Pramanavartika. Again, I talked about this, right? Mind over body, body over mind. Which one? In our situation right now, it's pretty much brain over mind. Okay? Because we haven't learned to control our mind in such a way that the influence from the brain doesn't necessarily affect us. A highly advanced practitioner, his or her brain, no, it doesn't necessarily affect the mind. But in our case, yes, there are scenarios in which you, for instance, you have a brain injury and it very much affects your mental capacity. Unfortunately, it happened to one of my schoolmates, an Israeli monk, very good in his studies. And after he finished his studies at the IBD, he went to one of the monasteries in the south. And he had a slight stroke. And he was too busy with his study, and there were no facilities for him to get treated. And therefore, he had another stroke, and a stronger stroke. And now he's back in Israel. He's in a facility that takes care of him. He can no longer really speak. He's in a wheelchair. It's terrible. And he was about to get his Geshe degree. So I keep referring to him as Geshe Punsok, because for me he is a Geshe. He just hasn't taken his exams yet. So in this case, it's terrible, and we're all hoping that he'll recover. They're doing prayers for him all the time. And the group, Israeli group I'm associated with, they're called the Dharma Friends of Israel. They always go to see him, they go to visit him. But it's unfortunate that the brain, of course, and there are other monks and nuns who suffer strokes and who suffer, of course, that's a mental injury in that case. So usually it's, of course, affecting the brain if it's a stroke. And there's, definitely, that's a huge problem. But an advanced practitioner, but even, no, I mean, well, Lama Rinpoche suffered a stroke, but his brain injury was only limiting his physical movement, not his mental capacity. In fact, mentally, he spoke clearer than ever. Right? In the past, he spoke in a way like, sentient beings. I love these coughs because it gave me enough time to write notes. Between every cough, I could write down. So however fast he talked, the cough was a break. But it was still challenging when you were not used to it. But the point is, he was actually could talk without the cough later on much faster. But that's besides what I'm trying to say. But I tell you a beautiful story that's very inspiring, which shows that our mind, if we use it in the right way, you can actually avoid certain diseases, such as dementia and Alzheimer. Very scary diseases. So I read about this many years ago. There's something called the nuns study. Have you heard of the nuns study? No. There's a group of nuns called the Nuns of Notre Dame. They're actually from the US. It's a group of nuns who are socially very active. So a lot of compassion and action. They are educated as well. There's a certain degree of education that they have. So of course, being educated, studying and so forth. I mean, now His Holiness encouraging Tibetans who are illiterate to learn how to read and write and learn the Dharma. Wow, the only obstacle that we usually have is feeling I'm too old to it, right? There is no, you can learn at any time. Neuroplasticity, of course, is not as easy, but you can still. Anyway, so the point is, they are also, study is important, it's considered important, education is important, but also compassion in action, to practice compassion in that you go out and teach in schools and are active in helping others. Now, I don't know all their philosophy, but that compassion and love are important, love thy next and so forth, that they're important, I understood from what I read. And at some point, someone noticed that they became really old and fit as a fiddle. They became really old. They were like at the age of past their 90s, and they were still, like I said, really fit, clear memory, able to do. And I think one of the oldest was, I think her name was Sister Mary. Sister Mary, I seem to remember her name. And one neuroscientist developed an interest and said, you know, in terms of the percentage, a lot more of you should have Alzheimer or dementia. In terms of all the nuns living to a really high age, there should be more having these diseases. So they asked Sister Mary, will you donate your brain after you die? And she's like, sure. Sure, you can have my brain, right? So she donated her brain. And they started to ask the other nuns, and they're like, very willingly, yeah, I donate my brain. And you know what they found? Many of them had the brains of a person inflicted by Alzheimer or dementia. No symptoms. No, it still gives me goosebumps. No symptoms. Because they kept using their mind. They kept using their mind. You know, like oftentimes in the West, you retire and then you just, go a little here and there and then put on the TV and watch television, and you're not as active as you used to be mentally, right? And, use it or lose it. That's not just true for muscles, that's also true for our brain. And then if these symptoms arise, well, of course, there's no brain training as such, and so they simply take over. But that's the beauty of mind training. So these nuns, to a certain degree, of course, that's mind training they underwent, not about emptiness and so forth, but the compassion aspect that has got such healing ability and such, beneficial characteristics. And in that way, these nuns, of course, as I said, it also had to do with their level of education, so studying. And Buddhism was good for that. However old you are, however long it's been since you went to school, you can't get around it. and I'm saying this is one system. Of course, there's so much else to study. Yeah, to keep your mind fresh through new ideas, learning new languages when you're older. My mom started learning English when she was 70. She can actually talk. No, she learned it a little bit before that. She knew a few words when she was in like 50 or 40 or 50, but she really started studying when she was 70, and it's okay, right? She says funny things sometimes, but still. So I think it's important to keep our mind, of course, active at all times. Yeah, not to feel, oh, I studied so much in my life, now it's time to do something. No, keep your mind active, but keep practicing. So wisdom and compassion are healthy for you. If it doesn't take you to enlightenment, or it's not what you're aiming for, maybe it helps you to overcome dementia and Alzheimer and so forth. And I must say, of the learned masters in Tibetan Buddhism, those learned teachers, I haven't met anyone who had dementia or Alzheimer. Of course, I've met nuns in particular, like elderly nuns, who traditionally didn't study and sometimes just took care of the children in their family, though they were nuns. So they weren't mentally as active, didn't know that much about the Dharma. It was just culturally the way it was a few centuries ago, decades ago at least. But despite, leaving aside them, just focusing on those, like I said, practicing wisdom, compassion, and so forth. I've never met anyone who had dementia or Alzheimer. So that's really good news. At the very least, do it for your own health. Do it for your own health. Practice those two for your own health, right? I think it's wonderful news. I kept that from you towards the end. I was tempted to talk about it before, and I thought, no, that's like the dessert at the end. Not at the very end, but it just came up, so I thought, yeah, now is a good time to share that with you. I think it's beautiful. Yeah, a nun's study. And of course, there are different theories, etc., so it depends on how you interpret it. But yeah, there's a lot to do with this social activism, this compassion in action. And we spoke about that, compassion in action. It's good for everyone involved. Yeah, all right. And on the other hand, you know, what I also remember I read years ago, we couldn't get any news. The only news were Newsweek and Time magazine. And the Times of India, they had like one page of international news, but usually it was full of, you know, Indian news. There was a lot going on, so there wasn't that much international news. So we kind of absorbed it, our classmates and I. It was like one had a Newsweek. It was so expensive, it was 40 rupees. Who could afford that? So we all shared it. I think it was 40, then 50, and I don't know, now you can't really get it. You don't need to get it, you've got the internet. But I remember reading about the Taliban. There was this really interesting article in there about the Taliban at the time when they're really violent in Afghanistan, when it was really violent. It was just like, yeah, the first time they actually rose to power. And there was one psychologist who treated the Taliban. He was a therapist. Was not a member of the Taliban. His wife, in fact, ran a secret school for girls that no one kind of knew, but kind of knew. But the therapist was very important to the Taliban because they couldn't sleep. They had PTSD. I mean, they were so violent. They had killed so many people. They had all these dreams, and it was that violence. And it was the psychologist telling them, when on Friday, the Taliban would stand on the roof and ask everyone, shout everyone to come for prayer. And someone would say, the therapist is not coming, and they'd leave the therapist, let him be. Because they needed the therapist. So he didn't have to go and, to mosque in the same way all the other ones did, especially when he was treating people. His wife, teaching these girls, was kind of accepted because they needed him. They were traumatized by their own terrible actions. It shows our mind is not made to be violent. Our mind suffers terribly, right? It suffers terribly. No one, this is why when I hear now people starting wars, I mean, what people didn't know of Hitler at the time, he was so sick. He was such a sick person. He couldn't sleep. He probably had Parkinson. He had a weird kind of fart disease, but that's okay. So he had like the bad wind and so forth, but also mentally he was not okay. I mean, besides the fact, of course, the horrific things he did, but mentally, no peace of mind. You cannot experience peace of mind, which is what's so horrible about using gas in the Second World War to kill people. You know why they used gas? Because people couldn't shoot other people. It was like when you directly, that was an indirect way of killing people. They couldn't bear it. So, and then they had this horrible way of using cyanide. What's it called? Cyanide, yeah. Because that was like removed, you know, you just put it into the building, and it's terrible, of course. But that's not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is that we cannot, actually killing will, and in that moment, be very traumatic to the mind. If it's, especially if the motivation is to benefit, that's a whole different, euthanasia, that's a whole different, but here it's mere hatred and mere ignorance. And so thinking of what those people have to expect in the future out of hatred, out of incredible. And in that way, for millions of eons, it's described. Millions of eons for each person that you kill out of that motivation, then the suffering you may experience. And then if it's millions, right? And it puts it a little bit into perspective, I think, that, yeah, it's so important to refrain from these actions. Compassion is healing. Hatred is worse than a disease because it causes all other diseases, right? Yeah, so I think we should remember that at a time and age when we're really concerned with our health, right? Eat kale and be compassionate, right? I mean, continue eating good food and exercise, but practice love and compassion. Practice love and compassion, starting with yourself. Starting with yourself. Yes. Sometimes we are our worst enemy. We are our worst enemy. Not sometimes, we are our worst enemy. No one is, we are our worst enemy. But we can be our best friend. Okay, great. Now going back again. It's time for a break. It's time for a break. Let's take a break. Yeah?
I want to ask a question on organ donation.
On what?
Organ donation in a Buddhist perspective.
Right.
Because if you're not a practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
then there's this whole thing that in Buddhism it says that you know, the person is in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And can you, at that point of time, because organs need to be harvested within a certain period.
It's a little bit complicated. It's a little difficult, that one. Yeah, organ donation is really... Yeah, because if you're not dead yet. You see, dead in Buddhism doesn't mean the same as dead medically. You can still be, the consciousness could still be in the body. You could still be in the body, and it could disrupt your death process of like the mind growing subtler and subtler. And if suddenly an organ is removed, you're checking out the mind. It's very difficult. I think it needs to be dealt with case by case. I mean, oftentimes if a person, in an accident for instance, an accident is more sudden. Accidents are more sudden. Accidents are sudden death, which is why oftentimes a person is more likely to remember their previous life if they died in an accident. If they were suddenly, the consciousness is suddenly, because the body is no longer viable, is no longer able to hold it. So there are people who are not terribly sick but slowly die. That is a different situation. But for someone who's got terrible cancer all over the body, it's like the cancer has affected all their organs, then the organs are no longer really useful, of course, if they're affected. Plus the person is more likely to die more quickly. That's what I heard. But accidents. I told you the story in the Indian newspapers. It sometimes says, "Oh, this boy remembers his past life." I have an article. I don't know where I got it. I got it in one of my books. I cut out this article about this boy. It's a really fascinating story. He was born somewhere in the Punjab, and when he was little, he kept saying, "I want to go home." And his parents believed in reincarnation, so it wasn't a big deal. So it was like, yeah, sure, he remembers his past life. And he kept saying, "I want to go home, I want to go home." And, especially when he started talking, and he would tell them where he came from. So at some point, they couldn't keep him. And as he was more verbal, he became more verbal, he gave descriptions. He said, like, my father was a tailor, my mom was a homemaker, and he had this little tailor shop. And one thing that was very obvious was that he had incredible fear of tractors. Every time there was a tractor, he would run away. So anyway, that was all about this little boy. I mean, he was happy with his family, but he wanted to see his other mom and dad. And eventually they took him to this village. Or no, I think his parents traveled first. And he described to them the place, and it was shuttered. It was shuttered. It was closed. This place he had described, and so there was no tailor in there. So they asked someone, and they said, yeah, there was a tailor in there, and he basically couldn't work. After some time, he was so upset. His little boy was killed by a tractor. He was overrun by a tractor, and he was 5 or 7 years old when he died, a sudden death. And so then they took the little boy there. And there's a picture in a newspaper with his old mom, with his mom from a previous life, his present incarnation, and a photograph of his previous life. And they even looked similar appearance. So that was, for me, another example of thinking, sometimes we just have similar rebirth if the karma is similar. So he looked similar, and he had this fear of tractors. So it wasn't an irrational fear, what seemed an irrational fear. No, he was killed by one. So he avoided tractors from then onwards. But it was the sudden death. And there are other stories. In Israel, there was a member of the Druze family, and he was murdered. And he remembered when he was reborn his murderer. And he insisted, it was in an Israeli newspaper, and he insisted, I want to go back there. And his family, believing in reincarnation, at least to a certain degree, they followed, and he said, I'm buried here. I'm buried right here. And they dug the ground, and there was a corpse in there. And he said, I was killed, I think it was by an axe, right? He told them, and there was the bone was broken here. And he said, this person killed me. And they took him to the person, and the person freaked out, and they admitted they killed him. And they were imprisoned because they admitted. It wasn't like they couldn't really prove it. But the fact that this boy remembered and could show them the corpse and could lead them to the person, the guy was so freaked out, he basically admitted that he had killed him. And he was imprisoned. Wow. Right? Incredible. But it was a sudden death. So, therefore, going back to your question, sudden death is probably, it's more like, but it's still difficult. But what a sacrifice. What a sacrifice. I think a person on a certain level, it's like, I don't care about my rebirth if I can help others. That is huge. That's pretty big. But I don't have an organ donor pass. I'm worried. Too much self-centeredness. Yes.
Most of the traditions.
Pardon?
In most of the traditions,
they don't encourage it. No, they don't encourage it. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. In Hinduism, it's not encouraged, is it? No, no. Maybe for the same reason. Yeah. Yeah, it's that problem, harvesting an organ too early. It's all about too early. Harvesting it too early. Anyway, let's take a break.